joined by a very special guest, someone we know very well. It is Adam Seifer, co-founder, co-CEO and of Everplans and co-author of In Case You Get Hit by a Bus. Adam, you were the first guest on In Case You Get Hit by a Podcast. Welcome.
Woohoo! No way. Yeah.
So
first guest. Best guest.
Now, we're not saying that we have motives for inviting people, but recently my niece just finished her first year of college. Okay, it's over. The first year is college, and I know that's a big moment, having a child go off to college. And we know that this is going to be happening to you soon. So Adam, first, let's start with a really easy question. Where does the time go? Where does it all go?
Yeah.
Where does what time go?
You're about to find out, Abby. It just, you wake up and your kid's going to college and you're figuring out how you're going to fit a bunch of exercise equipment into their bedroom.
See, that's
honestly, I can't even imagine it. But, well, so how does it feel? How are you doing?
We're doing okay. We got through a lot of the hairy stuff with the application and the essay writing and the waiting to hear back and the tortured deciding on which college to go to. But I think now we're dealing with the life stuff, right? My boy's going away and we have to get him set up.
I really wanted Angela.
Are you like?
I'm sorry. Sorry, go on.
Gene.
You go, Abby.
I was just going to say, but how, so I asked how you're feeling, but how is he feeling?
Well, I think he's, in that in-between place that people get when they're walking through a really big door, right? I think he's interested, he's excited, he's curious about like what is going to be happening, but I think there's a lot of uncertainty and fear around. I mean, we've all been through it, right? Like you don't know if this is going to be the right place for you. You don't know if college is even right for you. You don't know a lot of things, and we're very close. So it's there's a lot of unknowns.
I want to know.
I've been talking with Adam. We keep talking over each other. I'm sorry, Gene.
Go ahead.
So excited. Everybody's
so excited to have you, Adam. We literally want to attack you with things.
Well, before we get into like some of the logistical stuff, because I talk with Adam every single day for basically 12 years. But this past year, I feel like I've had like a little bit of a front row seat to watching Adam's process with Milo of going through the whole college thing. And what I can't understand is, because when my kids have to do this, I don't even know what the world is going to look like, but the amount of stuff that you have had to do this year and even getting to this point has been insane. I don't even understand how anyone goes to college at this point. But can you just like talk a little bit about what it's been like? Because it seems like it's very different today than it was when we went to college. Not saying you're old. I'm just saying it was a different time.
I think you are saying I'm old, but it's okay because it's the truth. And look, you're
the one who was a kid going to college. So.
Right. Look, when I was applying for college, you had to write a letter to the college and request an application, and they would send it to you, and you would have to put it in a typewriter, and you'd have to type everything out. And if you screwed it up, you had to write back to the college and ask for them to send you another copy of the application, right? Like it was a lot of this manual nonsense work, but it was fairly straightforward. And I think now with technology, there are certain things that are much easier. You're not typing and you don't have a little jar of whiteout to fix mistakes, but there's a lot of different platforms that you end up having to be involved with. A lot of schools are working with something like Naviance, which keeps track of all the schools you're thinking about and gives you access to information about each of those schools. and lets you indicate where you are in the process for each of those schools so that the guidance counselor can kind of keep track of which kids are where they need to be and which kids are not, which is very cool, but it's a lot of work, a lot of overhead. And then most schools now accept applications on what's called the Common App, and that's online. And so you can go in there and, check off which schools you want to apply to. It shows you what their requirements are. It gives you places to put all of the information about your hobbies, your extracurriculars, your scores and such in there. But then each school has its own weird thing that they want. And so you have to go to each school's website and create an account there. And sometimes there's supplemental essays. Sometimes they're asking for supplemental materials. And so I think even for the most organized of high school seniors, it's a lot of different things to pay attention to. And then you're on the FAFSA website, the federal student aid website. And that is super crazy because now you've got, 17-year-old, 18-year-old kids that are responsible for making sure that their parents track down old tax returns, bank records, information about investments. And if you miss something, you can get caught in a loop. And so there's really a lot of stuff to pay attention to. And then everybody's got a different due date. There's different ways of getting different types of test scores into the different platforms. It's a lot. And it's very easy to miss something because one of the crazy things that happens is when you get on some of these platforms, your kid's name and email address and home address gets sold to every college in the country. And so all of a sudden their email inbox gets filled with sometimes like a few hundred emails a day from different colleges. And it's really easy to miss the one email that came in from one school that says, oh, by the way, we don't accept the transcript in the format that you sent it. You have to come to our website and enter your grades manually by hand. And so, yeah, a lot of pressure to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks.
The good news is once you get to college, you don't have to go to class.
Yeah, after all this, he better.
Adam, I thought that because I was thinking doing it the old way was really difficult. And then I thought, well, now with all these modern tools, it would be simple. And it sounds like it's worse than just filling out paper essays, sending them in, and then hearing back from your school. It was like a two-step process. You fill out the form, you send it to the school, you maybe get some reference letters or whatever they require. And you could do 5, 6, 7 schools. It cost like $150. I remember that was the thing. It was like $150 per school, or it was more expensive, at that time. It felt that way. But it seems like you are jumping from site to site and place to place. So is it difficult to apply to more schools? Would this like narrow your focus on schools? Or can you say, I'm going wide?
I think it does give you the opportunity to go wider easier because using the Common App, I think you probably have like 75 or 85% of the core stuff that every school needs already in there. And with the press of a button, you can just apply to another school. I think what's interesting is there are some schools that require extra supplemental stuff and some schools that don't. And so I think that's part of the calculus. If you can actually afford the application fee for a whole bunch of schools, you might as well just check the box for 10 extra schools that don't have extra requirements because it doesn't take you any more time to do it. And so I think for some kids, it really opens the doors to where they could apply because it does make certain parts of it easier. But, it's just like any technology, right? Did email actually make your life easier? Not really. It just made it different.
Mm-hmm. Quicker. And how much are the fees, would you say, like for applications? Is it all the same for each school? Do they change per school? Is it like average?
It is somewhere between like $50 and $100 per school is what we saw. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to afford a whole bunch of those, you can really apply to a whole bunch of schools. And what's interesting is your guidance counselor is trying to get you not to do that, because they don't want you to take up slots that you're never going to use from other kids at their school that they're also working with and that they care about. And then also guidance counselors often get judged by the acceptance rates of their kids. And so they don't want you to apply to too many places and bring down their metrics.
Guidance counselors.
Yeah, this is crazy. This is so crazy. I only applied to one school, I think. And I just went to that school.
You applied to one school? Okay, you're not human.
Well, so you must have applied early and knew that you
I applied
wanted to
early.
Oh,
Yeah,
I thought you'd be like, no, I
and
applied like the day before we had enrolled and walked in the doors and was like, hi, I'm here. Hi, John Legend.
I was you guys probably won't believe me when I tell you, but I didn't want to go to college because I wanted to, I guess I wanted to go to college, but I wanted to live at home with my parents and I wanted to go to school at home in Washington, D.C. And my parents were like, absolutely not. Like, that's not even a thing. Don't even, fixate on that. That's not an option for you. And so I applied I went on a trip. I stayed at a school and ended up being like, okay, this is kind of cool. Philadelphia is an awesome place. This is a nice city. I love the campus. I went to Penn and I fell in love with Locust Walk, and the Penn campus is pretty incredible. And I applied, and then I remember very vividly the day I got in, because I did not think I was getting in. There were 10 kids who applied from my grade at school, and 9 out of the 10 people got in early.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. It's fundamentally different from when we were applying to schools. It does not happen that way. Because of things like the internet, there are more kids from more out of the way places that are applying to the top competitive schools than there were when we were growing up. And so, yeah. And during the pandemic, things got extra nutty. So tests were optional this year, like SAT, ACT test scores were optional. All the kids everywhere had the same grades during the pandemic, either because they got pity grades from their schools or they were just all cheating on Zoom. And there were no extracurriculars for the last 2 years. So there was no way to judge any of the kids. And so because everybody knew that, all the kids that usually apply to like schools like 200 through 2000 applied to the top 200 schools. And so it was a big crapshoot this year. And Milo had a number of friends who, applied to 10 plus schools and got in nowhere, which never used to happen when we were growing up.
So if you were doing the process over again, would you recommend, doing it differently, or did you guys just do it the way it has to be done? Like, what should we take away from this as far as like the best way to go about this process?
I mean, I think anybody that goes through any process where you end up doing a lot of stuff at the last minute and it's really stressful and hard would take away, we should start earlier. And so, but it's hard, it's hard to say that to somebody who's never suffered through that before. They're going to start when they start. But there's a lot of last minute tears around, finishing the essay, about realizing that some of the schools you're applying to have all these supplemental requirements that you're not ready for. And so I think we would start earlier. I also think that, one of the interesting things about being able to digitally apply to a whole bunch of schools means that it's really expensive and time consuming to potentially visit them all. And so I think we probably would have been smarter about doing some visits earlier in the process to weed it to zero in on a couple of more favorite schools earlier in the process. I think we waited until pretty late to start looking at the actual schools.
Is there any kind of legwork that you could do ahead of time in terms of all the forms that you had to fill out or paperwork that you had to get together that could have made your life easier?
Yeah, I think definitely for the FAFSA, which ends up being sort of a parent burden more than a kid burden, because it's like trying to gather the paperwork for a mortgage or something like that. I think for most people, they are filling out the FAFSA. And so it probably makes sense, like pretty early in the game, to take a look at what the application requirements are and start getting that paperwork together, because sometimes some of it is virtually impossible to track down at the drop of a hat. And if you wait until late in the process, it can be extremely stressful.
Yeah.
With your
I
kids.
mean, and that's not just for college, by the way. That's for like camp and school and anywhere you have to, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Anything where you're applying to something on a deadline and they're going to be asking you for a lot of information, the earlier you can get started, the better. And for something like this, it's not like, every mortgage company has different requirements. Every, landlord has different requirements. The FAFSA is the FAFSA. It's like a federal form. And so anybody could go find out what they're going to have to gather together at any point. And so it's a good one to really get started ahead of time on. We didn't see too many schools that are need blinds anymore. I think that might also be a relic of a a kinder and gentler economy. And so I think you really do have to pay attention to that. But you did mention something that I'll also point out, is that a lot of schools have scholarship opportunities. And not just schools, but there are like local organizations like the Elks Club, for instance, that have scholarship opportunities. If you sleep on those, you definitely are going to miss the boat, because there's a lot of legwork and meetings that might need to be set up, or interviews, or other things like that you might have to do to work your way through the scholarship process. And so if it's something that you're into, you really have to dig in on it.
Abby mentioned something that I want to return to, that her parents were like, no, you're leaving home and going to school, which is usually the opposite of how I've heard many parents who are like, it's not that they want him to like stay at home, but they'd like him to stay close. They're like, you're not going to the West Coast. If you're on the East Coast, you're not going too far down south. And Abby, so like my family had a Penn legacy, like my grandfather, my father, and then they're like, my sister's like, no, we're not going there. And for me, I'm like, well, first, no, I want to leave Philly, just because I had enough time. And second, there's no way I'm getting in Penn. And they didn't have any studies that I wanted to do. But they're like, well, we'll get you a car. Because I'm like, yeah, because you want me to live at home and just commute back and forth. But I was like, no, but I understand leaving. So Adam, is that something where you feel like that independence, Milo getting away, is something that's important to have that moment of time to grow up, time to experience life without us around all the time?
I think I'm on team Milton Karen on this
want your kids out of the house.
No, it's not even that. I want him to try it. I want him to experience what that's like. It's not for everybody, and it may not turn out to be for him, in which case, of course, I'm going to be devastated when he leaves. It'd be awesome to have him here. But I think for his sake, I know that I had a great experience going away to school and being on my own, and I wasn't so far away that that my parents couldn't come get me when I passed out because I had the chicken pox. But but I was far enough away that they were not showing up, and I wasn't bringing laundry home every weekend. And I think that's a good thing to try for most people this age. And if it's not for them, then you can go with plan B. But yeah, we would like Milo to try something.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad my parents forced me to do it. Or, I mean, we didn't really come to that. But I mean, I think people have a lot of anxiety about doing new things, or of course, going to college. For some kids, they're super psyched. Like, I just need to get away from my parents. I want to get out of here. I want to go do this. I can't wait to get to college. But other people, are nervous about it. I remember vividly being so nervous about college, but it wasn't just college. I was nervous to go to summer camp. I was nervous to go to, I once went on it was an Outward Bound type trip. And it was really hard for me. And I had to carry an 80-pound backpack on my shoulders, which was like cutting into my sides. I was miserable. I hated every second of this trip. And I called my parents midway through and told them I had to come home, and I begged them to come home, and the trip was about to kick me out. And they were like, no, you can't come home. And then I called 2 days later and was like, I'm going to die if you keep me on this trip. Like, I'm physically not capable of being on this trip. And they drew a hard line. And so I think they told me if I came home, I wasn't allowed to drive my car and I wasn't allowed to see any of my boyfriends. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll stay on the trip. And so I ended up staying on the trip, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And college, obviously, it was, just like that. And so I think it's about pushing, even though it's hard. I think unless we try to push, right? Like, unless they actually get that push to get out the door, especially if they have anxiety about it, they might not do it. And doing it is just so important.
Abby, my parents sent me away to sleepaway camp when I was 5 years old. When I went to sleepaway camp, I started at 5 years old. So that idea of being pushed out, I guess if you start that, I know
would be the cutest little 5-year-old sleepaway
so tiny. And I think that's crazy because I see 5-year-olds now, and I think even they're like, the people that are still at the camp are like, dude, that was young to be alone. But I think that ability to step out, but that worry that your parents, and I think for parents too, to kind of allow their kids to do this and to force it, because your parents, that was right, because they knew that you'd enjoy it. They knew that it would help you grow. They knew that, but at the time you didn't. And because of it, it made you a lot more adventurous in doing stuff than you probably wouldn't. And Adam, you as well. You do a lot of stuff, and you've taken your family a lot of places, at least, pre-pandemic and even during the pandemic, which we will talk about in another episode of what happened then.
By the way, just for the record, when I came back it was called Boot Saddle Paddle. And when I came back, I loved it so much that I was such a camper at that point. I wanted to pitch a tent and sleep in our backyard from that point forward. It's like, you have these life-changing experiences, and then you come back and you become a different person. And I think that's what, right?
You commit. You commit to the process. And Adam, so now getting into like logistics and things, thinking of your kid going away, because what's interesting is you mentioned that you mentioned the most benign reason parents would pick up their children from college for passing out, chickenpox. I guarantee I was expecting another thing. So we've talked about this in the past, because this is something, Abby, a couple of years back on Forbes, we had an article about what to do as your kid's going away. So I want to run down a list of things, and we're going to speak of it. And also, Adam, you got Milo going soon. Abby, your kids, it's not that far behind. I really wanted Angela to get rights to Cats in the Cradle and have it playing underneath, like, my boy was just like me. And I thought,
don't do that.
So don't age me, Gene.
So rather than get too emotional and sad and thinking about that part, let's think about like practical stuff that, being a responsible parent. So one of the things we said initially, HIPAA authorization form. Now, why would this come in handy for a child you're sending away to school?
Yeah. So once your kid turns 18, they're officially an adult. And once they're an adult, it's considered a HIPAA violation for a doctor or a hospital to share information about them with anybody else, even if it's their parents, unless they've fully authorized it. And so, your mileage may vary. Some doctors are a little bit more sort of bendable around that, depending on the situation. But if your kid's going away to college, or just leaving the home and they're 18, heck, even if they're living with you and they're 18, you should probably have them fill out a HIPAA authorization form so that if they do end up in the hospital, for some reason, the doctors can actually communicate with you about everything that's going on with them.
Yeah, and the forms
are easy to get, but they are from what I can tell, different from state to state by a little bit. And most states, most doctors probably will honor an out-of-state form. But the easiest thing to probably do is if your kid's going away to college to a different state, have them fill out a HIPAA authorization, both for the state they're going to and the state that you live in, so that you've just got all the bases covered. You might as well do it while you're doing one. Do both.
Has your school told you to do this? Like, is this something, who tells you to do this? Is it your doctor, or like, does the school say, here's some good forms to fill out? Like, if you,
this podcast is what tells you to do this.
No one tells you.
Well,
I don't know, right? Like one of the issues that we're facing is being bombarded with information from the schools and having a sort of a noise to signal problem, figuring out like what stuff's important and what stuff is just rah, go. And so there may be some email sitting somewhere in a parent inbox or a kid inbox about things like this that you need to do, but I haven't seen it. And so I had heard about it somewhere, and it's something that I'm telling all of my friends to do for their kids.
I've searched for
heard
checklists.
About it somewhere. We've been talking about this at Everplans for 12 years now, but somewhere you've heard about it.
It snuck
somewhere.
in. Somewhere.
I think I might have heard about it at work.
Which you always.
I might have heard about it when I was writing our book.
Yeah. And we have
seriousness. It comes up all the time because we talk to people, we talk to our partners, we talk to our friends, we talk to our right. Like it comes up, I would say every few weeks, somebody's talking about kid getting ready for college. And we say, don't forget the HIPAA authorization. They're like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that.
Right. And then sort of related to that, it feels a little bit grimmer, but it's, if you're doing one, you might as well do the other, is you should get your kid to sign a healthcare proxy or a healthcare power of attorney form, because the HIPAA authorization form only lets the doctors tell you things and share records. But the healthcare proxy or the healthcare power of attorney form actually lets you, as the parent, technically make health decisions for your child if they're not conscious and able to make them for themselves. And again, usually in most instances, a doctor or a hospital will allow the parents to make those decisions. But in situations where there are, divorces and step parents and things like that, you're probably saving yourself a little bit of heartache if you just get something like this signed and have it ready to go.
That is that was the next thing on the list. And another thing for students looking out for this that might be listening, there's a possibility that you don't want your parents to be involved in your medical decisions.
Yes.
If you're 18 years old, you might say, you know what, I don't want. I have an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent that is much more responsible, that is much more apt to care. I don't want my parent coming in there and messing things up. So to protect yourself, you're going to want to make sure that if they see that on file, that the doctors will say, no, actually, they're a healthcare proxy and it's free. You could fill one out at any point. And it's not necessarily going to ever be used, but it's good to have just in case.
Well, now we know how Gene feels. Like he definitely did not ask his parents to be his healthcare proxy. Who did you have, Gene?
I totally would. My parents, they were so easygoing with that. I'd tell them in a second. They'd be like, yeah, you're fine. Your leg will grow back. Everything will be great. They'd never worry about that. But also back then, I think doctors were, like Adam said, a lot more like willing to just let a parent come in. They just let them come in with the room with you. They talk to them. They were just more free flowing with information. I think now things have locked down more, where there's a possibility the kid could sue the institution, the medical place, and say, I didn't want my parents or this person involved. You brought them in. That was against my wishes. And, and now we got a problem. And that's a good lawsuit. And that's basically how they get paid for their college, which is one way too. Another thing.
And I was just going to say, go ahead, Gene.
What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, related to sort of all this medical stuff while we're at it, another thing that we're making sure of, it's not a form that needs to get filled out, but, for the first time, my kid's got to be responsible for his own health care. So now he actually has to carry around a copy of our health insurance card, right? Mm-hmm. It's something that he's never really considered before, because any conceivable health issue, one of us would be there at the doctor or the hospital with him. And that's not necessarily going to be the case. And so he needs to sort of not just have the card, but be aware of like what health insurance actually means and how it all works, so that he doesn't get himself into a really tough situation.
That's a really smart point, because you think about it, growing up, you have caring parents. They make sure you're well. They take you to the doctors. They make all those decisions for you. And I remember the first time you get sick when you're at college, it is kind of terrifying, because there's no like school nurse. They might have something on campus, but when you actually have to go to a hospital, you freak out because something that you've never experienced before is now happening and no one's around. And that panic sets in. Being aware of what to do. Maybe, okay, go call first, talk to your parents, but maybe urgent care is more appropriate than sitting for 12 hours in an emergency room for something that might not be a big deal. It might just be a really bad upset stomach. It might be some other issue, but not to panic and run to an emergency room. And also knowing what specialists and doctors that you can go to, and having your parents help you find that. And in a way, it'll help you later in life, so you're not so confused when you first have to go to a doctor or a hospital. Another thing we mentioned, one of the things we also mentioned in an article, Power of Attorney, just the financial aspects, where if you had to step in and again help with finances or manage anything like that, that's a possibility. I think it's good. But Abby, this was something you had with a friend, and it's the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act of 1974, aptly named FERPA. Do you remember talking about FERPA and what that is? And Adam, have you had to deal with this for that as well?
I don't remember talking about this. Did we?
You wrote about it years ago. Yeah, you blocked it out because I think your kids are getting closer to college age, so you want to deny the fact that your life is progressing.
Remind me what it was.
It's almost like HIPAA, but it's for your school records. Mm-hmm. And so technically, a school doesn't have to give any of your school records to the parents unless you've signed like a FERPA release form. I think
I thought you were talking, Gene, about some personal experience I had.
No, you talked to someone and they mentioned it and you're like, wow, what is this? And then of course I made I'm like, are you sure it's FERPA? Because I know another phrase that people use often. And they're like, stop being
me and my mix-ups, but I mean, if anyone's going to mix up FERPA, it's definitely me. But
it's just a few letters off. That's why.
FERPA. Sherpa.
That's it. Sherpa. And you get that together. But also another thing, and we've talked about this a lot lately with regular organization, IDs. What IDs do they need?
Yeah. That's crazy.
I mean, what would you, Abby? Okay, what IDs? Winnie's now about to go off to school. We fast forwarded a couple of years, and you're like, what IDs would you say you need, besides obviously driver's license, because she'll be driving a lot by then?
Yeah, well, I have to imagine, I don't know, do they take their passports with them, or do you keep it safe, Adam? Like, I would imagine you have to have your driver's license, especially if the kids are going to be driving in school. If they have a driver's license, definitely driver's license. But I don't think I took my social security card or my passport with me. I feel like my parents kept that in our safe or something like that.
I don't know that social security card is a good one to bring with you to college, because you can't really use it as ID anywhere. So it's just sitting around waiting to get lost. That's better, leave it at home with your parents. But, especially if you grow up in New York City, a lot of kids don't have driver's licenses by the time they go away to college. And so to be in a different city without like an official government photo ID feels like a little bit weird and scary. And so I think we're going to have him bring his passport. I would rather have him lose it and have to deal with that than have him run into a situation where he needs ID for something and doesn't have it.
Yeah. And I guess now today people need to bring their Vax cards or have a picture of your Vax card on the phone. And then I don't know, Gene, what other IDs?
I'd say for the parents, what Adam said about keeping the social security card, because also remember back in those days, like our social security number was our student number, which is crazy when I think about that every time you went anywhere, you had to say it out loud and anyone could hear it. It was right there. I have old ID cards and it's printed, the NYU ID card with my right on top, like because no one thought, wow, identity theft is going to be a thing in the future. So having the parents do that, I think also, again, parents keeping copies of the passport if they're taking a passport, keeping a copy of Social Security, and also making sure you know where their birth certificate is. Most parents probably do, but keeping it there because there could be certain, when you're filling out certain forms, you might need to produce that in some. They're like, we need to prove that you were born in this country. We need to prove that you were born when you said you were. And those types of things, I know when people are dealing with financial aid, they could ask for a lot. And it's always best to say, if your kid calls up, you're like, yep, got it here. And again, getting copies isn't difficult. You could go on, we have it on Everplans where you just look for, I think Vital Check is like one of the sites that provides it. And when I had to get a bunch of copies, because I didn't know where my birth certificate was, it's like $25 a copy. And it's good to have because you never know when you have to go get a passport, if you lose your Social Security card, if you lose a driver's license, you're going to need that. And having to scramble for it is just stressful.
Yeah. I mean, we've started setting Milo up with two things. So one for sure is now there's a password manager, a family password manager. And, there's a whole folder of stuff that I had always managed for him that he's going to need to make sure that he has access to, like even things like MyChart logins for various doctors and hospital systems that we may have had to deal with over time. And so we've got a pretty good thing going now with a password manager. And, of course, he's going to need the Netflix password while he's away at college, and he's going to need the Hulu password. And so making sure all that stuff is in one place, and then setting up an Everplan for the stuff that's not easy to share in a password manager, like copies of all of these IDs, birth certificate, Social Security card, extra copy of the passport, extra, digital copy of the, of all that stuff, so that he can easily go grab a picture of it, but it's not like hanging out in his like Google Drive or on, the desktop of his computer where other kids are going to be sort of probably in and out based on the way I see them use each other's devices.
And also new contacts, because not so much for you, having roommates, a new people that you're dealing with, because you can't, over the time, you've known all Milo's friends and how to get in touch over time. But when you do have a roommate, it's someone that could come in and out of your life for a couple months, or it could be someone that you're friends with for the rest of your life. But getting to know that, so in case of emergency, you're not really scrambling and calling up, like, who would you call at the university? Who you're not going to call up teachers. You're not going to call up, it's very confusing because you're like, do I call up their main security office? Do I call their main number? But if there is something that happens, knowing like, okay, who are their neighbors? Who are their roommates? Who are people once they move maybe out of student housing, knowing all how their apartments run, since you'll be paying for it anyway. Those types of things.
I feel like if there are students who do bring a car to college, because I think there are some kids who go to schools where they have to bring cars. Is there anything related to the car that they need to bring too?
Yeah, I mean, it would be good for the kid to have a copy of the title for the car. So, if something's going on and they get pulled over, that it doesn't escalate into, maybe these kids don't belong to this car doesn't belong to these kids type situation. It's good for them to have access to that and to have access to it digitally. So it's with them wherever they are and not locked in some box somewhere. I think there's a bunch of things with the car. I mean, ideally, the kid is bringing a car to school is also starting to learn how to take care of a car. And so knowing like when the next service needs to be and where they need to go to do that is probably, a pretty wise idea. Obviously, the auto insurance information, if they're going to be driving around, they need to have that. So, I think there's a bunch of like add-on stuff that comes along with a vehicle.
and registration
Yeah.
to make sure it doesn't expire when they're away if they're out of state. And other states, an interesting thing, if someone, let's say you're going to school in New York City, you need plates on front and back of your car. Like other states, sometimes some states do it. I know New York does it. And if they came here, you'd get a ticket every single day that you didn't have that. You get pulled over because you don't have a plate on the front and back of your car. And that's something that you learn the hard way when people come to New York.
Also, like if you have a AAA,
Yeah.
or something like AAA, to make sure you have that, because I remember once being on a road trip with my a cappella group in college, and we ran out of gas on the road.
Wow. Is that a Glee? Are you sure this isn't a Glee episode?
In college. I mean, college is where real stuff
Did you sing
happens,
for gas
guys.
money?
So
Did you guys sing by the side of the
you
road?
need to be prepared. I don't think my parents know that story, so I hope they're not listening. But
they pushed you out of the
having
house.
AAA
They're like, good, another experience. That's how Abby learned her survival skills, to be so resourceful.
yeah, well, I have a 10-year-old who was like, I don't want to live here anymore. And I said, well, the sooner you get your shoes on and get out the door and go to school, you don't have to be with us anymore. So, I mean, I don't know where. I have a feeling she's not going to be like me, and she's going to be like, get me out of here.
Yeah. I'm going to school in Hawaii, and I'm going to study abroad, and I'm going to be as far away as possible.
She may already be gone, Abby. Has she come
might
home?
actually have already gone to college today. Okay. I think we're done. Done.
We got